from the Illinois State Capitol.
We turn now to our Reporters Roundtable. Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register and Daisy Contreras from NPR Illinois joining us this week. Good to have you both with us.
Great to be here.
Indeed.
Some of the news of the week, something we have not yet covered on this show, is that AFSCME, the largest government union in the state, is on the verge of, at the time of this recording, on the verge of accepting and signing a contract that they haven't had in years. This includes an 11% pay raise. Over the span of the contract, it gets to 11% gradually. There's a $2,500 cash stipend for state workers who have been here for the last 4 years to help offset the, quote, financial hardship they endured under Governor Rauner. And there's some other nice benefits for paid family leave and all this thing that are on the table. In exchange, they have to kick in a little bit more for their health insurance. But Bernie, give us some of the background here. And what does it mean to finally... Remember, AFSCME was on the verge of going on strike. They had authorized a strike under Governor Rauner, but they never went through with it. It's been an interesting tango between the governor's office and its employees.
Well, it has indeed. Governor Rauner campaigned, particularly in the Republican primary in 2014, saying the real problem with Illinois is government union bosses. He basically thought and said repeatedly that government unions who help people get elected with their money and their manpower and then negotiate their wages and benefits across the table from the people they help get elected, that in the private sector that would be illegal and it's wrong. So he manifested that in many ways. He said the same thing at his inauguration address, and the contract with AFSCME employees, which is about 40,000 state workers, expired I think July 1st or June 30th of his first year, 2015. And then they, had arguments that went to court over if they were at impasse or not. He just wasn't going to budge on things and was going to make demands and tried to impose demands. The union was fighting him tooth and nail the entire way. Clearly, the union and many unions were for J.B. Pritzker's campaign in 2018. He's a Democrat. He says he's pro-union. He believes in the union movement, and he thinks government workers deserve to be represented like other workers. This settlement of the contract, which actually got announced right near the end of the legislative session where Pritzker was getting all his other stuff done through a Democratic legislature. Right. They just put out an announcement, we've reached an agreement, we'll have the vote that you talked about, Mark. It's just an entirely different atmosphere because you have a governor running an administration that is pro-union and says we want to reach a deal. They did, and you talked about where that contract is going.
There was an interesting comment from Chuck Stout, who's a labor relations expert. He was sitting at the table under Governor Rauner trying to negotiate a contract insofar as they could get there, and then also with Governor Pritzker, and he made some observations about the differences, but he also talked about the fact that some of these workers are doing critical work in prisons and helping with DCFS. And here's what Chuck said earlier this week.
They're hard jobs. There's not a lot of people knocking down the door at DCFS to be a caseworker or an investigator right now. There's not a lot of people in the general public that would walk into a prison and do the work our members do in a correctional facility. They don't come in droves to get those jobs.
Daisy, he seems to be talking about morale and what it's been like for union members not knowing their future with a contract, but also the fact that those are some pretty tough jobs.
Yeah, especially if you're, for example, a DCFS worker. Over the last few years, maybe even decades, we've seen so much criticism, and scrutiny on DCFS on cases where children have died, and we've seen more of that over the last few months, and so lawmakers are getting involved with that, and yeah, there's this question of who do we get on the ground to go work with these kids when we have just so much going on at the same time.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's also we discussed earlier with both of our guests, the elected officials that were here, about this $45 billion capital bill that Governor Pritzker has to rebuild Illinois. Daisy, it almost seems as if this big, complicated bill that promises vertical construction of big buildings and projects and also improvements to roads and highways, it was sort of pushed out the door really quickly, 300 and some pages, but there's still lots of loose ends, it seems. Is that a fair characterization? There's a lot of money out there. We don't really know where it's going to go.
And yeah, I think a lot of it is out out in the open still. For example, like you said, there's the horizontal and the vertical construction aspect of it. The vertical is connected to gambling and revenues that are coming from gambling. So we have 6 new casinos. We have sports betting, the legalization of sports betting, and the licenses and everything that's going to come out from the taxing of that will go toward the vertical construction, maintenance of prisons and universities. Until that happens, until Governor Pritzker signs that into law, until we have casinos and racetracks and sporting venues getting their licenses for sports betting, for example, that money does not exist.
So Governor Pritzker hasn't even signed the capital bill into law. We expect he will do that at some point. But it sounds like you're saying when he does that, there's not going to be some big, like, $45 billion lottery check just waiting for the state to go say, okay, let's spend money. It's really a process.
It is, yes.
How long is that process? You covered capital bills in the past before.
Certainly, there are some things that are in the bill, you know, certain millions of dollars for railroad relocation work that's going on in Springfield, more than $100 million to fix up the state armory that's near the state capitol building that's been sitting idle for years. But we don't even know, for example, what that building would be used for. There's just money in there. The $45 billion, it's over 6 years, and it's an authorization. So some of this does have to be worked out. You know, there was talk early on from the Springfield perspective that the mayor of Springfield, State Senator Andy Menard, talked about maybe a $50 million university building of some sort on a big plot of land that's sitting, it's just grass right now. They're having concerts there. It's called the Y Block because there used to be a WCIA there. That's not specified in the bill, but the mayor of Springfield said, well, we can apply for funds for something like that through what is in the bill. So just because they've authorized $45 billion doesn't mean it's all going to get spent right away, and we are not sure what it all is for. There is clearly talk that there hasn't been a big capital bill in the state for 10 years. There was clearly no trust between Governor Rauner, the Republican, and the Democratic legislature that he worked with but bashed over the 4 years he was here. When Governor Blagojevich was here, also with Democrats in charge, they didn't trust him either, so there was no capital bill during his time. You have to have trust. Pritzker and the legislature have trust. Now the people have to trust that they're going to spend the money wisely as a lot of it starts coming in, and bonds get sold to pay for these things.
Daisy and Bernie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
We're back in a moment.